Hello everyone, on this week's Melbourne Catholic podcast, we welcome all the way from New York, Chris Lowney. And Chris, welcome to the Melbourne Catholic website.
Thanks Shane, that's my pleasure to be with you.
Well, you've just completed a series of talks around Australia.
They were working me hard.
And very good of you.
Hard yakka, is that what you say?
I like it, you sound like an Aussie. And thanks for giving us some time. On the podcast, folks, it's a fascinating discussion. We've just recorded it. And let's pick up a couple of the interesting parts. Firstly, you talk very much on leadership. You spent some time as a Jesuit seminarian. He was managing director of JP Morgan, folks, the investment bank. Fascinating background. So you've really got some interesting thoughts on leadership. Just give us a little tease of what we cover.
Yeah, okay. So maybe I'd get into it this way. If I asked folks to think of the names of one or two living leaders, everybody would think of super famous people.
Yes.
Pope Francis, Angela Merkel, whoever. And so my first point is that that's the wrong way to think. It's a broken stereotype. And in fact, each person has a leadership opportunity and responsibility.
Okay.
And I kind of develop in the podcast how we, could really understand that, but whether you're in a family, small organization, the boss, someone in the team, life gives you every day some opportunities to lead. So that's a core message of mine, whether I'm talking to Catholic groups, business groups, whatever. That message is always a core message.
And one of Chris's great books, his first book in fact, was Heroic Leadership, and it draws some of those ideas out of the Jesuit world into the corporate world. Great read, and we do talk about that in the podcast. Then we move on to something else you've been writing about relatively recently, and that is how can the church revitalise itself? It's going through really tough times, and we cover some fascinating ground there. Walk us through a little bit of that.
Yeah, so I guess I teed up this way, that a lot of the things I wrote and a lot of the ways I speak have been about how some of our spiritual wisdom and traditions and values can be of value in the secular world, so to speak. And I thought it might be interesting to flip that completely around and say, look, what are some of the wisdom and insights of the organizational world on the outside that might be relevant for the church right now? And the way I frame it is, I feel like in many ways we're undergoing as a church our worst crisis in centuries. If you just look at the objective statistics about decline in participation in sacraments or church, lack of interest among young adults of what we're doing in the church, and so on and so on. And so to me, this presents a kind of a crisis, but also an opportunity to revitalize itself. And the book and our discussion is, what are some of the things, like a spirit of urgency, for example, or a more creative spirit? What are some of the cultural aspects that we need to cultivate in order to revitalize ourselves? That's the core. It's
not all doom and gloom, folks, but it's very realistic and it's very, very interesting. Chris has given this a lot of thought, and his book covers it in more detail. So he's on his way back now to New York City after a very busy time here in the world's greatest city, Melbourne, Australia. But Chris, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Very much enjoyed the chat.
Okay.
Chris Lowney on our Melbourne Catholic podcast this week.